To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
I'm gonna put that out there really quick before you said a word. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the High Performance Logistics Sales Chatter, Saturday, Wednesday. We have our good friend on board, Dean Croke, the Principal Analyst of DAT Freight and Analytics. Yeah. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning. Yeah, good to be with you. It's always fun on Wednesday mornings.
Oh, I know. It's always something. Somebody throws something next, Never a dull moment here, folks. So just bear with us. This week has been something else. I've been reading some horrific stuff that's happened out on I-80 in Wyoming. Brutal. Yeah, they closed it down. They opened it up, and then I think it was a few hours later they closed it back down. They have the high wind overturn risk warnings out there. I mean, there's a lot of truckers out there that are stranded right now.
Yeah, Jeff. Well, I-80 was the one that was shut down several times in January, early in January, right? So it's been battered a lot. There was the early report there probably 3 or 4 weeks ago. Carriers were shut down for 4 days in some of those early storms. So it's been hammered like pretty relentlessly, I think, with bad weather. Some of the colder temps out in the upper Midwest this morning are pretty brutal. But the one that caught my attention was I-35. I was watching the news report on the Weather Channel, and they showed it closed down.
Yeah.
And this is around Dallas. And, of course, it's precarious with all those spaghetti junctions that are elevated where all that cold air comes in underneath. And folks don't necessarily slow down on those big spaghetti junctions. So there's a lot of accidents that have been happening. I think the fact that they shut down I-35 is significant. Whether it gets to 20 and 40 today and tomorrow, that's another story, because this was a storm that had a 1,000-mile reach. Was a small coating up to a half inch of right up through the Tennessee Valley. So that could have an impact on the freight market. It will absolutely have just an impact on carriers. But we've got -9 here in Boston on Saturday. That's incredibly cold.
Like here in New Jersey too. I mean, it's you know what? I got a picture. From one of my clients down in Dallas, and she lives near I-35, and she took a picture out of her condo, and it was this little hill. The bridge went over the water, and complete stop. There was a traffic cop that was in the middle. You could just see the sheet of ice. It was a standstill. And the picture she took looked like it was a few miles out. I mean, the only thing they have down there, and I think you know this too, is just sand trucks. They don't have the plows and anything like that. So, I mean, if they can't get out there to put the sand down, what's going to happen?
Yeah. There's not much you can do to get around it either, because that's a massive freight corridor up I-35 from Laredo. That's just one of the busiest freight corridors in the country until you get to Dallas, and then all the imports come in there. So this is the time of the year, right? And the weather forecasters are sort of predicting that things will get a little bit colder now nationally. So this is the time of the year that miles get a lot harder, and shippers and brokers see a lot more service failures happening. I'm not sure people automatically build in more time into their shipments.
I do,
but things break though. This is tough times for carriers. Like, not all miles are created equally across the year. Although when you look at some of the accidents, some people just don't slow down. So I mean, that's the other part. You see these pileups of trucks, which I think we probably predicted on a show here a few weeks ago, that it's inevitable. You see these, how people are not seeing these warning signs. I get whiteouts happen quickly, but my experience on the road driving my truck is people don't slow down when things get really, really bad. So it's almost inevitable that these pileups occur. So yeah, tough. It's a tough week for carriers and drivers, but we're sort of, as we said on our show yesterday, we kind of look like we're in the bottom part of the spot rate cycle. We've probably got another 5 to 10 cents to go, right? It kind of looks like that in our forecast, but there's no question that spring is around the corner and freight volumes are going to pick up. It was interesting, some reports yesterday. David Jackson, the CEO of Knight Swift, I guess they had an earnings call yesterday, and I'll give you a quote. He said the general consensus, almost unanimous from customers, be interesting to get your take on this, is that their inventories have been, by that time they get through the spring. So by the time they get through the spring, their inventories will be caught up and they'll be back to a more normal ordering cycle and start moving bigger volumes closer to the fall shopping season and the retail season. So it looks like this is sort of a bit of it's definitely a quiet season. He said that it was I think David said, and David's an incredibly clever guy. He said it was one of the slowest Q4s or busy season in his memory. That's a large truckload carrier. Of course, Knight Swift is probably the biggest for-hire country. So non-existent Q4, but it's interesting that we're heading into what looks like a more normal season, which is something we've been suggesting is more normality this year. And of course, imports are down, so we're seeing a lot less volatility in those port markets. But it kind of looks like spot rates will even out in the next couple of weeks, and then we're off into that market cycle where spot rates go up, and then eventually, sometime around the middle of the year, contract rates will start to be dragged back up again. So this is it, and we're still losing. I did some numbers on this, Jeff, from the FMCSA. We've been building a chart here that takes the new entrants and re-entries, and then we subtract away the revocations from the DOT authorities to get the net. So you get the net capacity gain. So are we adding more capacity or losing capacity? Up until the pandemic started, we were always adding about 1,000 new carriers a month of all DOT authorizations. We've been losing 2,000 a month since October. We had a pretty steep drop-off in October, November. There was a big sorting out there. Since December. So December, January, we've been losing about 2,500 carriers on average each month. So our net capacity, if you think about capacity as all of those trucks over 10,000 pounds, net capacity is we're still losing carriers. And of course, that's that bottom part of the freight cycle that I alluded to, where typically we go through this massive expansion, which is what we had during the pandemic, and then we have a contraction, spot rates fall, and then spot rates start to come up again and new entrants come back to the industry. So as we sit here at the end of January, can you believe it's already the 1st of February, we're kind of at that bottom of the cycle. So as we predicted on the show here late last year, this feels like bottom of the cycle in Q1. It's all panning out pretty much is what we thought would happen.
A little longer, though. I mean, a little longer on that spot market, though. I think you'll agree, compared to years past, that stretched out a little bit. And it's funny. We were talking about the inventory. Now, I have a customer who sends me notes. Cancel shipment, inefficient freight to load and let go, And I've seen that for a few weeks now, and they're in the furniture business. And now we're starting to see that pick up now. But also you have to take into consideration, and I'd love to know this if you have the numbers, how is the reverse logistics, the returns looking since J1 to where we are now? And how is that compared to years past? What are we seeing as a percent?
I haven't seen any numbers on that yet. I normally get that data off the National Retail Federation. The NRF generally put that out, but it's lagged. So nothing yet.
And I mean, it's, you still have the disruptions out there. We were just talking about the Wyoming. We're talking about I-35 in Texas. We had the big storm that went across from California in the Midwest that affected travel in Indiana, Illinois, Ohio. That caused great delays. I definitely put buffers in there, talking to the track and trace team, just, giving them a heads up, because look, let's face it, they're not on the road. They can't see it. They may read it, but they're not driving in it. So, we try to put that day or two buffer on the each lane, just as a precautionary, because we want our drivers to be safe. We don't want them to rush to meet deadlines, et cetera. Even though, we're using that published transit time, it's kind of like, in this time of the year, it's like null and void. I mean, the way that you look at it, because so many things are unpredictable. The act of gods come into play. So, disruptions, that's for sure. And we will for a little while, even though in the Northeast it's been pretty dry. I mean, I don't know what it was like in Boston, but we had 50-degree weather 2 days ago. I mean, that's unheard of.
Yeah. We're going to go from -9 to 53 in 4 days this week. So. But you touched on weather. Weather has had a big factor on some of the volatility in the freight market. We've got, and mostly precip. So we've seen a lot of rain on the West Coast interrupt the California produce season, although we're in the slack season in between seasons. Volumes are still down substantially. Reefer spot rates out of California are really suffering. State level rates average for all outbound loads is about $2.20 a mile for refrigerated carriers. That's excluding fuel. That's the second lowest in 7 years out of that state, with only 2017 being lower than that when it was $1.87. Florida outbound is suffering also. Hurricane Ian really slowed down that market. But produce season's still getting going down there. We're still seeing good volumes of winter vegetables coming out of there, but the strawberry berry season hasn't really started. The big thing this week, I think reefer carriers will be benefiting from this week. We expect, and we were seeing it on our market condition index, we were seeing capacity tighten in Lakeland and Miami reefer markets, largely because this is peak shipping week for Valentine's Day roses and carnations.
That's true.
Of which 90% arrive in Miami International Airport, mostly from Colombia and Ecuador. Mostly Colombia, about 70% come from there. But I've been there and watched this. The dozens and dozens of 747 jumbo air freighters coming into Miami every day with fresh cut flowers. They've got a massive infrastructure for transferring temp control freight, and then of course it hits the road really quickly. This is peak shipping week. Next week is a little bit less, and then it kind of dies off until Mother's Day. So we'll see. Normally, you would see the peak shipping volume of ornamentals, flowers, out of Miami start to trigger a little bit more of a sustained increase in reefer rates out of that state, because it kind of bleeds into the berry season starting to ramp up. And I think it's a little bit delayed this year, just based on the fact that the Plant City Strawberry Festival is a week later than what it would normally be, I think. So I think we'll see rates go up in the next couple of weeks and then come down. But we're still a few weeks away, maybe 6 weeks away from seeing produce season start to have that material impact on refrigerated rates nationally. Right, so we've got it. The things have got to get a lot warmer before we start to see the Salinas season come online. The lower third tier of the country get warmer, and more produce volumes start to come out of Georgia and places like that. So reefer rates are probably the worst.
Yeah, I have a friend who ships to all the big box stores out of Homestead, Florida, exotic plants, that kind of stuff. Does a lot of the reefer moves, multi-stop, that is. He probably does between 700 and 800 loads within about a 10 or 12-week period of time. All coming up, and I'm just curious how that's going to look coming out of Homestead, going up into Michigan. He wanted me to take a look at that. He was one of my really good friends I went to school with, and he does a lot. So I'm wondering how that's going to affect his business down there, out of that area, and that's going to probably start in the first or second week in March.
Yeah. I mean, produce season is one of those major seasonal events that has a material impact on rates. And of course, you mentioned rates decreasing. This shouldn't be any surprise to anyone that rates do decrease. What is a little bit different this year? Spot rates are decreasing at a little bit faster clip than the last 7 years. Yeah. So I'll give you some numbers. I looked at the last 7 years of spot rates over the first shipping month of the year. Typically, they decrease about 9% over the first 4 weeks. This year they've dropped 18%. So the rate, and it's not as bad in dry van. It's more like 11% down in the last month, and normally it's about 9 overall. Flatbeds really held up the best of all of the trailer types. Flatbed rates have only dropped. Let me look at the numbers here. They typically drop 6% during the first month. This year they've only dropped 10%. So still going down, but flatbed has fared the best out of all of those. But reefer, I think refrigerated carriers are finding it hard. Anecdotally, talking to some of my friends that run reefer freight out of the southeast and Florida, it's really tough going at the market. Their margins are really, really low. We had some rates that was exceptionally low out of Seattle last week. It was like 86 cents a mile or something, in that range. I think I did the numbers on it. Revenue was going to be $500 and fuel was $800 to go south back to Los Angeles.
I know that the opposite direction, coming out of Louisiana, going into Washington on tanker, not flatbeds or dry or reefer, but tanker loads, very expensive going up there.
You're talking not chemical
so going into the Midwest though, not so bad. These are hazmat shipments. So,
hazmat.
Yeah.
You've probably got
tankers. Do you see tankers?
No, we don't. No, it seems to be a fairly dedicated. I mean, there is demand for it, but it seems to be fairly dedicated because you've got to have dedicated equipment, tank washout facilities. There's a lot of deadhead miles in that before you reposition the assets. That's probably why the rates are high up into the Pacific Northwest, right? Because you've got a significant deadhead to get back to another load point.
Well, another thing too is that if you can afford it, if your supply chain can afford it, and you can push a lot of these OTRs to intermodal, as an example, we're seeing 42% on over the road compared to 18% over the rail on fuel, which is a huge difference. If you can afford, let's say 2 days, a day or two, depending upon what the lane is, it's pretty cost effective. You could do that.
Yeah. The other thing on the reefer market that caught my attention, I study the USDA truck rate report every week where they take all their produce regions. I think there's about 20 regions that they track rates to 9 capital cities. It's a really interesting report. So it's just the rates and volume for fruit and veg, like specific produce. Like it's not just all reefer. Out of the 18 markets, there was only one where capacity was slightly tight and there was a shortage of trucks, and that was Nogales, Arizona. It's in the Tucson freight market.
Nogales,
and of course, it's only a couple of 100 miles, not even that, from where the Super Bowl is going to be. So no surprise that reefer volumes and rates were pretty solid out of Nogales into Ontario, California, Phoenix, Arizona. But it's the only market that had a shortage of trucks. If you go back and look at the truck rate report 12 months ago, out of the 18 markets, 17 had a shortage of trucks. So this is, when you look at how the USDA tracks a surplus of trucks versus a shortage of trucks, you can see a very close alignment to, where spot rates are. We had someone ask on the show yesterday, when do we think spot rates are going to come up for reefers? You've only got to look at the USDA report to see what's being reported from growers in terms of a surplus or a supply of trucks. It comes out every Tuesday. It's a really interesting report, but it tells you about produce volumes across all of the growing regions, which of course change over the course of the year. So Texas is sort of still a really good market for refrigerated carriers along the border.
California is going to be down.
Yeah. Well, so it was interesting. We were thinking that we might see a bit of a bump when that bridge went out in New Mexico last week and UP halted all their services to Kansas City and Chicago. We didn't see a big bump in volume, some material impact because it was a 72-hour repair. So they really, people could have just held off some of their shipments knowing that it was going to be a quick repair. Rates did go up though. The data point that I think is fascinating, remember about 30% of your intermodal moves transit between Los Angeles and Chicago. So it's expected that we'd see some flow over to the truckload market. We didn't see a lot of volume in terms of loads moved, but rates did go up to $1.53. Now, $1.53 is exactly half of where it was a year ago. exactly a half. This time last year, it was $3.02 a mile, line haul, no fuel, from Los Angeles to Chicago. Remember, that was when we were just coming out of massive numbers of ships at anchor. It was 109 on the January the 9th, so congestion was high, imports were high. And so there's a very tight correlation between the two. Looks like Jeff's frozen. The internet gods have got him. Oh, he's back. I didn't have to pad too long.
That was going to happen.
Yeah, so that was we expected that would be a significant disruption to the freight market, but again, lots of capacity on the West Coast. Things are still pretty loose in terms of truckload capacity. So again, we're in a sort of for carriers in particular, a fairly precarious part of the year, and diesel has gone back up again in the last 2 weeks, which of course is not good news after 7 or 8 weeks of enjoying the benefits of rates coming down. So difficult times.
Yeah, in New Jersey, they came down to, like, I think it was where I am, 318, and now I think yesterday we were up to 333. I think it was. Yeah. Right. So they are creeping up. That's for sure.
Yeah, this is one of the things we've seen in the last year is as diesel goes up, line haul rates go down. So it's part of the reason rates have been bottoming out. If line haul rates, if diesel starts to increase significantly, then we'll see spot rates start to deteriorate, slightly. So again, we've got diesel's still one of the biggest drivers. We're about 16 cents per gallon lower than the July 2008 Great Recession peak of 4.77. So during the Great Recession, it only got to 4.77 a gallon, which of course is almost $1 a gallon lower than where it hit in July this year at $5.80 a gallon. So this is sort of historically high levels that are keeping operating costs high for everybody.
Now, talking about California and what Newsom put into effect with those, we heard 2010, 2009. We talked a little bit about it. I think it was last week. Yep. What are you seeing capacity-wise since that new law regulation went into effect? Like I said, I have a dray carrier out there who actually got something that said 2009, not 2010. Right. So what kind of impact? I know we threw some numbers out there, and I believe it was 10% or close to that. From the whole capacity out there who would be affected?
So not much. So still a lot of capacity. So capacity still, thinking about spot market capacity, it's still overshooting demand on the West Coast. Largely, I think, because of the precipitous fall in imports. John McCown wrote in his monthly newsletter last week when he looks at the top 10 he said the two volumes were down in Los Angeles and Long Beach 16% in November and 17% in December. Maybe it was the other way around. But those 2 months of decline in the last 2 months of last year were the biggest declines ever on the West Coast. So I think a lot of the fortunes in the dray and truckload market are tied to those plunging imports on the West Coast. So you've got a lot more capacity than you have, for the level of demand right now. That's why we're not seeing any material increase on dry van or reefer or flatbed rates.
Right, because they're coming down, right? Yeah. And
so,
I did a thing too about the Port of New York and New Jersey that it's still extremely busy.
Right?
Stuff going in there. What kind of procedures are you looking at? Are we still in the same area?
Wow. Still got a lot of capacity, so we're still not seeing any. So that's why I look at the net capacity. That's we're still losing capacity, but not enough to make a material increase on the overall supply of trucks in the market. So, but so there's just lots of very interesting things happening around the market. But we're still in the quiet season, which is what we've been saying forever and a day. Is this will be a quieter season than normal, and I think David Jackson confirmed that yesterday in his earnings call.
I still hopefully next week, if the data comes out, I'm still very curious about the reverse logistics compared to last year, starting on J1. I know you can't give it now, but let's chat about that next week if you happen to get it, because I think that's going to tell a big story on that.
Right. Yeah, we're looking to get a guest on our show that's Jeff Music from Pitt, Ohio, that will be able to talk about LTL volumes.
Good company.
We've been on our IQ show before, but I think that'll be a good tell. Maybe that'll time with when we get through the reverse logistics season.
Yeah, I had a good friend that worked for Pitt, Ohio for many, many years.
Right.
He's a friend of mine for about 38 years.
Yep.
And he just retired. So it's a good company. Very good company.
Welcome back, Ryan.
Thank you. I had a call this morning that had to juggle it. Dean, I was reading your blog post on the, I think it was on Monday. You came out and you were talking mostly about flatbed and like the booming market of Laredo itself.
Yeah.
Crazy to think about. When I was reading it, I started thinking about it because it is a port city, Laredo being for imports and exports. And you're looking at I believe it's the Columbia Bridge and then the world trade as well. Is there a comparison? Because we had Nerf on last Thursday, and he lives in Windsor. So Windsor is kind of Windsor and Detroit. You got that big bridge from Canada to the U.S. From Canada to U.S. and then from the U.S. to Mexico. You did mention that, hey, you expect more imports and exports coming out of Mexico.
Yeah.
What can you talk about that? Because I feel like that's something that we're not really highlighting as we're kind of seeing the data as it comes through.
Yeah, I'm actually writing a blog post about it for next week because, I was in, there's two markets that are growing. Texas is one, and particularly Southern Texas, when you go from Houston. San Antonio's booming because they're building a lot more warehouses around there, I think, for that cross-border logistics function. I still haven't found out if that's a trade-free zone just yet, but that may be part of it. Tesla building a big gigafactory in Nuevo Leon, $1 billion investment. Musk has built another big factory in and around Houston. It's a massive investment. I think it was an investment of $58 million on this big plant near Austin, Texas. So you're seeing a lot more infrastructure being built there. So I think that the part of the reason we're seeing so much development in Texas is because of the nearshoring. Hard to quantify. I did some analysis on our total volumes. We've been seeing volumes grow at about an annual rate of 9% for the last few years from Mexico to the US. That's spot market volumes. So yes, there is some activity going on. The other data point that struck me last week, and this is a bit like Jeff's trip to Fort Worth. I was out in Phoenix last week, and we've talked about Phoenix being a big growth market for a lot of imports, same as Houston's been a big growth market for a lot of break bulk and imports coming in from through the Gulf Coast ports. Phoenix was staggering. So normally when I drive out to Phoenix and I'd get out to like Goodyear, that's kind of where the outside of the development would stop. So last week I drove 37 miles from downtown Phoenix before warehouse development stopped. Right out near Buckeye. So we're only 100 miles from the California border, and we're only 300 miles from Ontario, California. So that's why you've seen, because we talked a lot about imports coming into the West Coast. We're landing in Phoenix because it's a backhaul truckload market. It was a great place to stage a lot of retail freight before it goes through the fulfillment process. There's no end in sight for warehouse development, and it's the same because of that surging imports and demand for warehouse space. It's been the same thing that's happening in Texas. So that's why we're seeing a lot more volume come into those two states in particular. They're always top 5 freight markets for DAT, both of them. But we're seeing, the McAllen market for flatbeds, for example, rates are up to $2.16 a mile last week.
Around the border.
So it's a border market. If you can get there with decent inbound freight, it's still going to be a really solid market. The data point that I picked up on last week, if you look at state level Texas rates, they dropped 4 cents a mile last week to $2.11. So that's about 11 cents a mile above the national average. But that was the second highest state rate in the last 7 years. And it was only last year that they averaged higher at $2.53. So state level freight rates for flatbeds are still really solid out of that market. And of course, you're still seeing a lot more development out in the Permian Basin. So there's still a lot of flatbed demand for product going out there. So I think Texas is still the place to be, particularly for flatbed carriers, but more and more for reefer and dry van carriers. It's a state that I think is going to be a really dominant freight market, maybe eclipsing the volume of freight we see out of California. We're certainly seeing higher load posts in the spot market in Houston than we do in Ontario and Los Angeles consistently now. And I think that's a big shift.
Yeah. Interesting. I used to do a lot of work in McAllen, right there on the border, as well as Los Indios. And when I used to go down there like on a monthly basis, Los Indios, which is northwest of McAllen, was booming at that time. I'm really curious, like over the last 8-9 years, the volumes that are coming out of McAllen and Los Indios, how much of a percent, because it was growing back then. I mean, it was booming.
Yep.
I'm just curious about that.
It's a booming place because so sorry, but we did a lot of peppers out of McAllen. Like we would do at least like 15 to 20 loads back to Ontario. And it was just like, oh my God, like even if you could find a guy in like Yuma, Arizona, we could pay them the deadhead to get all the way there and kind of go from there.
But got it coming out. Yeah, good rates. Yeah.
So reefer rates McAllen to Ontario this morning are at about $2.08. That's exactly where they were this time last year. That's excluding fuel. They do peak in March at 232. So we look like we're a ways away from peak season. The forecast still got them, the upper forecast by the time we get to March is at about $2.20. So not a lot of change there. But yes, you mentioned
though, because of what happened in California with the drought, the washouts, all of that. Where all that other produce is going to be, produced out of, and then what the impact is going to be on the industry in those markets. I'm sure that's going to rise. I would assume.
You have to think we'll see a very strong produce season, albeit a little bit later, out of the West Coast, which is great news for those carriers and growers out there. But just a fun data point, when I flew into Tucson last Tuesday night, last week, I could see I-8 and I-10 clearly from 34,000 feet. And so, I was just shocked by that. And I thought, and you look closely and you could see just bumper to bumper 18-wheelers for hundreds and hundreds of miles. That's just like a whole conveyor belt of freight. And you could see a lot of guys, I think it's that you could see them running El Paso, Ontario. You could just see how the freight flows. It was just amazing to see it from the air.
Convoy.
It's about a 25,000 trucks a day freight corridor between that northern part of Mexico and the West Coast. So you can see all sorts of freight coming in and out of that region. It's just a very heavy freight corridor, and every mile there seemed to be a state trooper. Like I've not seen so many. The police presence in and around Tucson, Phoenix was just staggering. I've not seen it like that. And of course, the other thing that really shocked me, I spent a decent amount of time in the truck stop out at Eloy, Arizona, in between the two cities, Tucson and Phoenix, at the Petro. And in the hour I was there, the both Customs and Border Patrol and Highway Patrol troopers followed in 6 trucks into the truck stop, into the fuel island, and then did their inspection. I've not seen that before. Normally it's on the side of the highway. They were really, really aggressive. I don't know what they were looking for. I don't know what sort of intelligence they had, but one guy'd go to the back of the trailer, and one guy'd go to the passenger door, which is, like get you before you have a chance to do anything. And they'd get up in the truck. And I thought, wow, this is pretty heavy duty stuff out here. So there must be good reasons.
Definitely. Well, you look at it too, right? You look at the impacts in the next couple of weeks. Like the Super Bowl is actually in Phoenix this year, so then you're going to see imports kind of going there as well. You got Valentine's. I know you guys talked about fresh cut flowers earlier on in the episode as well. And what are the impacts? Like, let's say for somebody, because I was actually watching your Life by the Mile episode that you did last year on YouTube yesterday, and I know that you're talking about like telling a story with data. Being able to, the importance of interpreting data as well. How can somebody, like we're doing themes here with Jeff and I, how can somebody kind of brand new, kind of getting into the industry, how can they really tell a story with data?
I think the first part is you've got to understand what you're hauling, like who's buying what you're hauling. Because if you don't know that bit, it's very hard to know how to use the data to tell that story. So I always say to carriers, understand the demand for what you haul, and then the data becomes very easy to translate. So if you're a produce carrier, you would want to be following, the whole produce magazine, or the Fresh Plaza. There's probably 4 or 5 produce specific newsletters or podcasts you can follow, and I listen to them all the time. I watch them all the time. I pull all the data down from the USDA. It's all freely available, and then I understand what the volumes look like, because on the USDA truck rate report, it lists the market and what produce are coming in and the volumes and the price. So it tells you about the price at the end point. So when you understand all of those things, and it takes a while to get a feel for how things change week to week, but just understanding that tells me a lot about where volumes are going to go. Remember on the show here, we said that when the rain hit California, you can expect an increase in volume across the southern border as Mexico steps in to fill the demand on the West Coast. It's exactly what happened with rates, because there's an increased volume coming across in El Paso, Nogales, Laredo, and McAllen, across the bridge there in Far. So if you were listening to that, you would have seen in the last few weeks a bump in rates. So that's sort of a good example of how you tell a story with data, but you can't really tell a story with data from the rate per mile only, because the rate per mile only is a function of all of those other things I just talked about on the supply and demand side.
Nice. Right. You almost have to use almost like a rolling average kind of deal.
Yep. And, being a little bit different, not doing the same thing as everybody else, being game to go somewhere where most people aren't. If there's if people are scared of going up and down Interstate 19 between Nogales and Tucson because of all the CBP guys, I'm there. I got nothing to hide. I'm hauling. Right? So there's a lot of people think like that.
Guys going off route.
Yeah, just give them a wave, like the one finger wave. It works wonders. Or the no-look wave as you go past them on the other side of the interstate. It's always important to wave. So it does wonders.
Always good with people. Just fun fact for you guys. Actually, I was at the grocery the other day. Lettuce is officially back to regular price. So we saw the romaine lettuce. It's back. It's back to $3 for $3.99 now. So I thought about you guys as soon as I saw that. I looked at my wife and she's like, "What's wrong with you?" But I'm like, "Hey, supply and demand. Gotta go."
So it's interesting.
Buy 1, buy 2, buy 3.
I looked at to our previous point, Ryan, I looked at the winter salad bowl production out of southern Arizona, southern California, down there in Yuma, Arizona. Produce volumes are up 25% year over year in that particular market. And of course, that's where 90% of our leafy greens are coming from. So they've got good volumes right now coming out of there. That'll run through March. But that's another good example of knowing, if you're in Los Angeles, do I deadhead to Yuma? If I'm in Phoenix, do I run down there and load? I've got good demand coming out of there. It's a market that's reasonably hard to get to if you're a carrier. So there's good outbound rates coming out of there right now. I didn't have a number on what the rates were.
How about vertical farming? Anything more on the vertical farming because of everything that's been happening out there? Have you read anything?
I haven't, no. And I'm just going to quickly, I saw a news story yesterday where the one in Tennessee, I think, were laying off staff. I just caught my eye and I never went back to it. I've just quickly done a quick search on it. It says still a hobby industry right now. No, nothing jumps up. There was some layoffs of staff at one of them, but I can't remember exactly why.
A lot of layoffs in many different industries over the last week.
I saw that Google actually sent it over to Dan. Google, their headquarters, they laid off all their in-house therapists. So you've got to kind of, it's kind of crazy to think about, right? It's so no more. You got the free breakfast, free food, and all that stuff. It's just kind of getting lean with everything. Right. So it's kind of a big. It's a big opportunity for people getting into this industry. You kind of be your own boss and kind of learn different data being different points and things like that, which is pretty incredible.
I was at a conference last week, and one of the things that shocked me, this was sort of a risk management conference, one of the things that really caught me by surprise was how much focus there is, how much the legal profession and attorneys drive the truckload industry in terms of, mitigation of costs and training of witnesses before they go into depositions. I'd had no idea that side of the industry was so dominant in how people think about managing risk. It was one of the things that just blew me away because I'd done defense work for truckload carriers where plaintiff attorneys allege that carriers are doing all sorts of evil things. It's not a fun business because plaintiff attorneys have a pretty good gig going where they know how to go after people. But what surprised me was a whole business around training witnesses. before in trial juries. I had no idea.
They have paid experts that they'll pull in from all over the country. I have a very good friend who is she retired from Columbia Presbyterian, and that's exactly what she does. She studies, and she's an expert in that field, and she gets paid to travel throughout the United States, as a defense.
Fascinating. And these people, and you look at the pre and the awards pre and post. It's night and day in terms of how much you can reduce the payouts based on training of your witnesses and your.
I got a career change. I got to look up after this. Then
But it was another side of
those nuclear verdicts. I'll tell you what, they really do. There's a lot.
Well, it was one of the things that kind of shocked me, because you think about trucking, we look at supply and demand and loads and things like that. There's a whole nother side of this industry that adds to the cost side of it, and that's the risk management piece. I was just totally shocked by how much, and I guess I probably should have known, but it's been quite a few years since I was involved in that side of the industry. It was just amazing to see how much specialization there were on the risk side. And of course, that extends to cargo loss and theft and all those. It's every facet of trucking. Yeah. So that's the lay of the land.
Well, Landon, I actually read something funny from you, Dean. Which in Ontario, we always say that BMW drivers are the worst drivers ever. We always just say that. Period. Like, if you got a BMW, that person doesn't know how to drive. And I was reading that drivers in congested cities have worse attitudes, especially BMW drivers.
How about
a little bit about that, Dean?
How about this is a really good.
See you later.
This was a study done where a company studied, and I forget the exact, 250,000 tweets across the US to determine the most negative things people say about fellow motorists. And it ranked the states, right? So there'd be no surprises there that Rhode Island ranks as one of the states with the worst drivers.
Oh, God, New Jersey.
Yeah, well, it's not far. You're not far up the interstate.
Jeff hits both. He hits both of those criteria.
Yeah. But luxury sports car brands, BMW, Maserati, Lamborghini, Mercedes, have some of the worst reputations. But BMW actually went out. The automaker went out and sent out an official note to all of their drivers to say, the finding was that BMW drivers don't use their turn signals. It was so prevalent that in June last year, they went out to all their owners encouraging drivers to use their blinkers, which I thought blinkers was more of an Australian term. Maybe it's Canadian also. But indicators, turn signals. But they signaled out BMW in particular. And I have to be honest, I didn't notice BMWs as being overly bad when I drive my truck. There's other drivers that in other makes of cars. I mean, when I was driving trucks in Australia, it was always the Volvo driver. Right, because it seemed to be this mindset of I'm in this cocoon of safety, I can do whatever I want. Closely followed by the scourge of interstate highways, which is the underpowered pickup with the motorhome on the back. That's like a red flag to truck drivers. But it turns out part of the story, though, that if you want to read it, it's on our blog post at dat.com/market update. What I was really getting at was how people had changed their driving behavior, because in this study by the Journal of Studies on Alcohol and Drugs, they put some numbers around how much recreational use of marijuana had impacted accident statistics and driving behavior. So, because I'm absolutely convinced there's a lot of people driving around stoned, and just by the way they drive. So I'm not going to let it go.
Yeah, I died when I saw that post, because it's so true in Canada. Like, now we're seeing even Tesla drivers. They're kind of creeping up that list. They're definitely creeping up that list. But it was funny to kind of see that, and I like that there was I believe there was a study from like YouGov or something like that where they did the personality traits. So Jeff, for you, BMW owners are more likely to be as knowledgeable. So you are definitely a knowledgeable person, and Dodge owners as big-hearted. I've never seen a Dodge Challenger or a Dodge things like that, but it's cool to kind of see that.
Isn't it funny? Isn't it funny how you? I used, when I'm in my truck, if I see a Honda CR-V or a Prius, I'm like the red flags go up. I don't know what it is. It's probably me just overreacting to a prior event. But I always watch those two brands. Honda CRV drivers have always been, and younger drivers have always been ones that seem to do the most egregious things on the interstates. So I think every driver on the road has their driver type based on a prior event that they always watch for. And I think the brain probably overcompensates and looks for them more often, so they tend to reinforce that bias. I know I do with certain types of trucks.
It's like when you buy a car and then you suddenly see the same car on the road all the time and you're like, oh my God, like where did these cars all come? Like when I bought my Ford Fusion, I saw the Ford Fusion everywhere, right? So it was kind of funny to kind of see that. And it's cool that you talk about like this, like people being stoned when they're driving, because, alcohol is obviously horrible, and then we're seeing the effects. Like I think we've had marijuana legal in Canada now for many years, right? And just to kind of see the commercials that kind of come out from Mad Mothers Against Drunk Driving, they're doing commercials for that as well, right? And the impact of that is, I don't know, for me driving, I don't see much ride programs, which is where you got like those police kind of set up on like the interstate, just waiting for people to kind of happen, right? But if we can get some more awareness for that, and we've talked about this numerous times as myself who has sleep apnea, people driving when they're not getting proper rest, right, Jeff? So it's really, really important.
I get sleep. Come on now.
No, I'm including you in the conversation. Over there.
We did. We did the studies like that shows that just being not just marijuana and alcohol, but just being awake, 17 hours of sustained wakefulness is the same level of impairment as 0.05 when you're driving a vehicle. When you put two groups on a simulator, get one group drunk and the other tired. That's a study that's been repeated over probably 35 years now. I was lucky enough to be part of the very first study in 1997. And it was the first time people tried to equate tiredness with alcohol driving. What's this? Daman is saying, but in Canada, for drivers that choose intra-Canada driving, there's actually no drug testing. Holy smokes!
Wow. That's unbelievable. Wow. Really?
Is that commercial drivers, Daman? That's interesting.
That
wow.
Is.
So is the inference there that Canadian drivers are even worse than US drivers?
We always see tractor trailers always involved in accidents, right? So
alcohol.
Unbelievable. I know. David's right. Yeah. There's something going on. I've just noticed in the last couple of years, people are just crazy. I don't know what it is. When you drive lots and lots and lots, like I've done professionally, you notice the change. Yes, commercial drivers. Wow, that's nuts. That's
ridiculous.
Well, I got a question for you, Dean, because like you as a driver, and Jeff too, I'd love to get your opinion on this. Do you think there's a correlation of days where there's not a lot of sun compared to like people's personality types and their driving habits? Because I've seen that too. What do they call it? Like the winter blues, where maybe we get like 1 or 2 hours of sun and get that vitamin D and things like that, and just kind of seeing the correlation.
Yeah, right? It's not that stuff. It's seasonal affective disorder. It takes a bit longer than 1 day for it to have an effect. So it's where you have less sunlight, and in particular blue light. That's why the alternate therapy is blue light therapy, where you actually have a more blue light to simulate sun, because it's the blue light in the invisible spectrum of light that triggers the sleep-wake cycle. So blue light's more critical. And when you lose blue light, what happens is you become more depressed. So to answer your question, it's not one night of less, more darkness and less light. It's if you live in a time zone where, like in New England, we're only getting about 9.5 hours daylight. We're past the shortest day, but we get 9.5 hours daylight now. It'll be 15 by the time we get to July. And the accidents are different though, Ryan. It'll surprise you to see that there are less accidents in winter because people sleep longer because it's darker longer, right?
And colder.
Even though the roads are slipperier. In summer, it's the inverse relationship. The more sunlight in summer, the more accidents, because people sleep less, because darkness occurs later in the day and people are having dinner at night. They're actually sleeping less, but getting up at the same time to go to work. So it's an inverse relationship. It's not what you think. Accidents don't just increase in winter because the roads are bad. They actually decrease. You can see different types of accidents, but your point's valid. There's a lot of people that are getting up early. That's why accidents go up after daylight saving comes in, when people lose an hour. because they're more.
I think that there's personality, the ones that are more prone to those type of changes. Like for myself, and I'm being honest, I don't know what that is. I don't because I'm just happy to wake up in the morning. So I'm not depressed that it's rainy out there or if it's sunny. Of course, I like sun over the rain, but it's not going to determine how I drive. I mean, I drive fast. I've always have. But
fast BMW driver.
Caddy. My wife drives the BMW, so I got to have a conversation with her later.
Show her the blog post.
I'm going to show her that post. So the thing is that I don't know that. I don't know. I think, you know what? I had this conversation not long ago, and I think it has to do with if you have an addictive personality. I think those two go in cahoots with each other. If you have an addictive personality, you're going to have a high depression type
probability
on that. Ones who don't would probably have the opposite one. And I don't have that feeling. And it's like headaches. I never get one. I don't know what it's like, and it's the thing is when people have it, it's just like, why? You always ask these questions. And in that case, should truck drivers with that type of personality be truck drivers if they're affected that way? How do you change them? How do you get them over that if that's their lifestyle and they have that personality where they get that depression and they get the sleep deprivation and all that other kind of stuff? I mean, that's a question that needs to be asked. How do you do that?
It's a big deal for carriers in Canada, particularly northern Canada, right, where it's dark so often. They have a far higher predisposition to, those seasonal affective disorders where there's just less light.
I wonder about Alaska. How about Alaska when they have 23 hours of sunlight? You know what I mean? It's like, it's crazy. I mean, how do you get yourself into that hibernation mood, about pulling the curtains, but you still get that glow coming in, I mean, it's like
you've got to have double insulation curtains, blue blocker glasses. You can wear blue blocker glasses that block the blue light coming in. There's all sorts of strategies, but you've got to be diligent, consistent, do the same thing every day, because if you break the pattern, like if you open the curtain, it's the same for a night shift worker, right? I did a lot of educational work for LTL drivers that did line runs. Yeah, and if what they would do is come home at 8 a.m, and every shift worker does this. They'll come home, they're dog tired, they'll sleep for 3 hours, and then they get up to go and do their honeydews. They light the brain up, and then they go back to try and get more sleep before shift starts at 6 p.m, and there's no chance. One of the things I would always say to them is keep everything dark and cold, until you're done sleeping, and then do it. So that's the sunlight will actually give them less sleep in that particular situation.
Graveyard shifts, though, will break you down. I mean, they do because the body is not used to that. I mean, the
circadian rhythm, right? Like that's what they kind of call it with the thought.
What's that?
But it's always the circadian rhythm. That's basically the rhythm of like your body with the light and the sun, stuff like that. But I was finding it funny with like graveyard shifts. Like I worked graveyard shifts for a little bit, and it was like, hey, I finished my shift at like 8 a.m. If I was to go grab a beer at 10 p.m., nobody bats an eye. But if I go into the bar and I'm like, hey, I want a beer at 8 a.m. after finishing my shift, everyone's like, oh, no, this guy's an alcoholic. It's like, oh, man, I just worked like 10 to 12 hours.
Right? I'll hire this guy.
So I was going to see. As we're going ready to kind of wrap up the show today, Dean, any, I know everyone's at Manifest this week. I feel like I've seen all the pictures and all the keynote speakers. Have you got anything coming up?
I'm at the Stifel Research Conference next week on Amelia Island in just up from Jacksonville. So I'm getting away from the cold here. Be a nice 2-day conference.
Sorry to hear that.
The tragic news. All of the big researchers that look at all the public companies are meeting up to talk about the trucking industry. And I've got an interview with Bert Subin talking about the spot market. So that's coming up. Of course, Mid-America Truck Show is coming up at the end of March, which is always a fun event. I don't know if people are going to that. And of course, ACT Research have got their big, I think it's their 68th annual conference or biannual conference coming up in mid-February. I forget the exact date, but that's in Columbus, Indiana, right next to Cummins Diesel. It's one of the big events on the supplier calendar. So it's going to be a huge event for anybody interested in knowing about what truck and trailer orders look like and used truck and trailer prices. That's the next 6 weeks.
Yeah, that's crazy. He's definitely a busy guy. I caught the episode yesterday with Cassandra, and it was great. She was a great guest that you kind of had on yesterday. So the blog posts, I believe you do them every Monday. Monday, Tuesday, you kind of
Tuesday night they go up at our under resources tab at dat.com.
Perfect. All right, Jeff. Any final thoughts before we take this bad boy home?
No, thanks again, Dean. I appreciate your input and the data that you shared with everybody. Can't wait until next Wednesday. It can't come quick enough because I really enjoy these type of days. I think it's very informative. So thanks again.
I'll be on the beach, actually, coming live to you from the beach.
Stop that, man.
And by the beach, you'll have better internet connectivity than Jeff.
Brutal thanks.
I want to thank everybody for coming out this morning. It is truly one of my favorite days, as Jeff and I really get. And for it, we learn a lot. And I don't know about everybody in the audience, but I use this personally so I can go and talk to my prospects and customers as well. So use this as a tool, like as we kind of say, tell a story with data, but know what story you're trying to tell, right? As Dean is kind of saying. So catch us back on the replay at 12 and 3 p.m. Eastern time. We will be on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Join us tomorrow as Jeff and I continue this week of basically of customer retention and mindset and all that fun stuff. And what is this week gone? We got a couple more days until the Super Bowl, till Valentine's Day. So make sure you got all your chocolates, all your Valentine's flowers and all that stuff. And we'll see you guys tomorrow. Take care.
Adios. Have a good day, guys.